on, boys and girls? It's been a little while since my last stream. I have been planning on putting one together, another one that's like 4 books, like the last two. But it's taken me a really long time to do it. I don't know why exactly. I think that in compiling my notes, I just never really want to do that, and so I'm just going to talk. I think that maybe that method is a little too arduous for me, where normally I could just turn on the camera and start talking. The only problem is I start rambling when I do that, and if I'm going over some material that is very precise, like a history, it's hard for me to really nail it down and speak accurately of it. Like I noticed when I tried talking about the history of Israel, it was really hard for me to be coherent without making notes and going through my notes. And I did a few episodes where I strictly just read off my notes. But listening back on that stuff, I don't like it as much. I kind of like some of the earlier episodes where I'm talking about like Dostoevsky and stuff, and I'm a little bit more off the cuff and just can give my impressions on it. So anyway, so I'll do a little bit of that. So the book that I just put down like 5 minutes ago, and I didn't finish reading, but I've got a little bit of the way through it, is Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. And I'm actually reading 2 Dostoevsky books currently, and the other one is Crime and Punishment. But I think I've gotten a little further in Brothers Karamazov, and here it is right here, actually. My little paperback version of it. It's a nice edition. All the words are very dense on the page. There's not much margin there. It's just it's a formidable book. There's a lot in there. It seems like a normal, like, hardcover, normally formatted edition would be really thick, is what I meant to say. But this one's not so much because it's very compact. And that's kind of how Demons was when I read that, or The Possessed. Each page had like 1,000 words on it. It was incredible how tiny the lettering was. It forced me to start wearing glasses. I got these ones. I was wearing these blue ones, the girl glasses. Everybody says they're girl glasses, but I don't wear the girl glasses anymore because they spread too far apart and they kind of wore out a little bit and they fall off my face, so I'm not wearing them so much anymore, as much as I'd like to. But so Brothers Karamazov, I've read up to the point to where the dad's getting really drunk, drinking his brandy, and he's got Alyosha and Ivan in the dining room with him, and they're talking about religion. And of course, his one son Ivan is like a staunch atheist, and his other son Alyosha he's an aspiring monk. He's sort of like lives in a monastery, and he is subject to the elder Zosima, is the guy's name. And so they're discussing religion. So he's got a religious son and an atheist son, and he's kind of doing all the talking. He's kind of blustering, and so his two sort of oppositely poised sons are not arguing. He's kind of doing all the talking for both of them, and each one, when asked, states their belief about God. And the one son said he believes, the other son says he doesn't. Or the one son says there's no God, and the other son says there is. So they state it more as fact, but they don't argue about it, and they don't debate. and they just sort of let the dad do all the talking, and he is more than willing to just make an ass out of himself in any situation. He's like the ultimate buffoon, and he's kind of proud of it in a way that he's a buffoon. And he had just got done making a complete ass out of himself at the elder's home, the monastery. And they had like a, well, first they met with the elder in his cell, and then they later went to like a dinner with one of the other elders, and he just completely made an ass out of himself in both cases, and I think they were kicked out. I don't remember exactly how the dinner ended, but I think it ended with them all screaming and yelling and leaving, and it was a big embarrassment. So the sons, the three sons, the one I didn't mention was Dmitri, and Dmitri is almost just like his dad in a way, kind of a chip off the old block, in that they're described as being sensualists, because the dad is like sort of like a, what do you call it, like a whoremonger, and his son Dimitri's kind of the same way, just kind of an unscrupulous little cad, right? And so in the book it just kind of got through with a situation where Dmitri had made this sort of confession to his brother Alosha, who everybody really kind of admires that kid, like, even though they don't share his religious beliefs, because he's really religious. They admire his noble qualities, because he is a very selfless young man who very unassuming and very non-judgmental, and just sort of accepts people for how they are, and accepts his father for who he is, and his father loves him very much. But the dad, he's just a total scoundrel, and it's made known from early in the book, and he just goes off on these diatribes and just totally degrades himself to the highest degree at any given opportunity, and with a little help from some brandy, and he's a bit of a drunk, and he's a rich drunk, and one of the things about him is that he makes no bones about the fact that he, as like a property owner, he's kind of more up, like, I'd say probably upper middle class for that impoverished area in time of Russia, where like most people are pretty poor, and there's this enormous peasant class, and he owns many peasants or serfs, and he just treats them all like shit, and like all the females, he just has his way with them, and he voices his approval of like the flogging of the serfs, and how like it's best to have a young man do the flogging, and then he can watch. It's just really weird. And then he makes mention of like the idea that he could have a young man flog the female serfs and then have him marry her as they get older. I don't know. It's just he has a really perverted mind, and he's just kind of a disgusting person. And he just has no qualms about voicing his treacherous sort of qualities. And so that's sort of the gist of the book, is that the dad's just a piece of shit, and that the sons just kind of tolerate him. And one of the sons, Dmitri, has sort of a lawsuit going against his father. He's demanding a certain amount of money from him, even though he knows that his dad doesn't really owe him anything. And so he makes his confession to his brother Alosha. And in doing, he describes the situation that he had going, where he was in the military previously, and he was working under this colonel, where the colonel had two daughters, and one of them goes unnamed. He doesn't name her, but then the other one, Katerina, turns out to be Dimitri's fiance. And the way that happens is that Dmitri sends the one daughter to the other and says that he'll give her 4,500 rubles basically if she'll sleep with him. And because it turns out that their father was loaning out government money to like a vendor, like a merchant at the market, and the merchant always brought back the money and then some. And so he was kind of like had this kind of side hustle going on with government money where he was loaning it out, you know, for interest or whatever, and he was sort of profiting on that. Well, the last time he loaned this guy some money, he didn't get the money back, and the guy just denied ever having known anything about it. And so this colonel was sort of on the hook to have to pay back the government. He had to pay him back within like 2 days because they basically gave him a call and said, you know, not a phone call, but you know, they wrote him a letter and said you have 2 days to give up the money, and he didn't have it. And so Dmitri took advantage of the situation and told the daughter to tell the other daughter, you know, I'll give you the money that your father owes, but you have to sleep with me. And so she comes to his house ready to do it, and he, for some reason, has a pang of conscience and gives her the money and doesn't hold her to the task. And so she like drops down to the floor and like kisses his feet and is totally grateful. And she writes him a letter and says that she wants to marry him because like she knows that he's kind of a dirtbag, but she thinks that she can reform him, and she like her own noble qualities lead her to somehow choose this man to be her husband. That it would be the ultimate form of like forgiveness and nobility in her to sort of overlook his, you know, the degradation of his previous action. And so she offers herself to him, and so he sort of leads her on to the idea, but he doesn't really want her. He kind of has his sights set on this kind of local strumpet who you know, is, you know, some girl with a booty, and he's into this girl with a booty, but this girl is completely like, you know, she's not necessarily a prostitute, I guess, not literally, but like she just plays men. And actually in the father, Fyodor Karamazov, he's trying to get down her pants too. And so like he's contending with his own dad over this chick that he's got the hots for, even though he's got this beautiful rich, not rich, but, you know, well-to-do fiance. You know, since the money got paid back that her father owned, she has other property. She has a dowry basically. So I mean, she's got that. And so so he's kind of got this choice between having a woman that everybody knows is better for him, or going for this kind of local strumpet who already is kind of hooked up with this older dude who's like her sugar daddy. And so he's being an idiot. He's kind of a slave to his passions. And that's sort of I think the idea of the book itself is how is sort of the stupidity of man who is led by his passions. And then there's the religious element too. So there's, you know, sort of this, you know, Eastern Orthodox kind of backdrop to the story, but then there's the idea that man is enslaved to his passions, and that his passions are going to, you know, are going to trump his intellect. Because if this guy was using his brain, he would know that I'll marry the beautiful rich girl instead of the local big booty strumpet, you know, who he doesn't even know if she really wants. I mean, she's kind of playing him and his dad kind of, she's sort of like playing his dad for money, and his dad's like offering her money, but then she's sort of playing on the affections of Dmitri as well. And at the same time, it's not really mentioned, well, it's mentioned in the book I haven't mentioned yet, that his other brother Ivan, the atheist, pseudo-intellectual kind of guy, actually has the hots for Dimitri's actual fiance, the good-looking girl, and Dimitri doesn't care. He's like, she can, he can have her. And she's still, she is trying to decide which brother to be with. So she's pledged herself to Dimitri, but Dimitri has no doubt that she will end up with Ivan, who's, more suited to her anyway. And Dimitri knows it, and he feels like Ivan deserves her more. And then, so, what's the old, there's a Dutch term, soort zoekt soort, meaning, like, people find each other. Like, they find people who are in their league, so to speak. And so, that's kind of what happens at this point, is that, people are kind of getting who they deserve more than who they, are supposed to be with. But that's kind of where I got to in this book, is the point to where they have this religious discussion, and the father basically kind of demoralizes his favorite son, because his favorite son is this, aspiring monk, and he's trash talking religion and God and salvation and making a big joke out of all of it. And at the same time, he starts talking about his son's mother, and basically how he used to like psychologically torment the kid's mother, and the kid went into like this like epileptic type of fit, not literally epileptic, but just sort of like the kid got really emotional, his face turned bright red, his eyes bugged out, and he like fainted, like he was crying and stuff. He like went into he had an episode because his dad was basically just nonchalantly talking about how he would just totally abuse the kid's mom. And it just really hit him deeply. And of course the kid didn't have the fortitude to stand up to his father and like beat him over the head with a blunt object. Instead, he just kind of recoiled into himself and, had an emotional outburst. And at that point, the other brother, Dimitri, who I think is the oldest, comes barging in and is ready to attack his dad. And that presumably is over. Like, they have some kind of pent-up emotion. They're kind of ready to butt heads over the strumpet that they both kind of have the hots for. But the kid wants to marry her, but the dad just wants to bang her. So, that's... I don't know exactly what prompted him to barge into the house and attack his dad at that point, but as soon as his dad saw the look in his eyes, he ran to his other son and was like, protect me, he wants to kill me. So that was the point where I stopped reading. That was the end of the chapter. So that, that's about, 140 pages into the book. Exactly. So that's where I'm at with that one. So that's The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. So one of the books I've been reading lately is Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead. And I'd actually kind of started listening to the audio version of it last year when I was painting a lot, and I would listen to it while I'd paint. But I think I've mentioned this before, I totally hate audiobooks. I'd much prefer to read. When I hear the audiobook, I'm always really annoyed by the narrator's voice, or the person reading. I can't get over it. Like, whatever their rhythm is or their tempo never really matches how I take in information, which is, I'm more of a visual person, so I like to read a paragraph and sometimes, read it at my own pace and kind of sometimes read it over and over again and kind of soak it all in. So a lot of times when I'm reading, I go back a lot. And so it's kind of hard to do that in the audio format. And what I'll end up doing is kind of spacing out for a little while, and then I just miss the whole section. So I get really annoyed trying to listen to audiobooks. But I kind of got the gist of the story while I was listening to it. So going back and reading it, I could kind of pick up the finer details. And I think I probably listened to what would equate to about maybe the first 150 pages. And and so reading back on it, I've read the first few chapters, I like the story. It's kind of an old story. It's set in about the same time that like The Great Gatsby was set, so like the 1920s, and it's in the same part of the country. You know, it's in New York, and there's some bits that are in Long Island, so it's kind of the Great Gatsby-ish in a way. And Great Gatsby is one I'll get to. I'm actually putting together another episode. Currently, I'm not like filming, for want of a better word, it yet. But I'm compiling my notes for The Great Gatsby, Brave New World, and what else? I think Capitalism and Freedom, which would be my second installment on that. And one other one I can't remember. That'll be the surprise. But this book, The Fountainhead, the main character, his name is Howard Rourke. And I would say that I identify with this guy pretty good in the story. Actually, he kind of reminds me more of a friend of mine. Good friend of mine on social media who I follow. He reminds me a lot of that dude. I won't say his name. But I identify with him a lot too. Because he's all about his, like, he doesn't care if he ever, like, has success with his chosen art form. He just wants it to be good. And he has like a vision of it. And he believes in his vision. And he doesn't really care if the world catches on, because he realizes that most people are pretty dumb. And popular tastes have gone into the toilet because most people are kind of uneducated and stupid. And so the zeitgeist has kind of drifted into a world of stupidity, and he's not really trying to please those people. And his chosen art form is architecture. And so when the story starts out, he is sort of in the process of getting kicked out of architecture college. And his roommate, who I guess is his best friend, I mean, it doesn't really say too much about how he feels about the guy, but it's his roommate. And his roommate is like the star student, sort of valedictorian of the school. And his work is not that good, you know, and he's sort of a sellout, and it's kind of about these two characters in the story that live these sort of parallel lives with their careers in architecture. And so the main character's name is Howard Rourke, and his roommate, while he's in college, he lives with this dude and his mom, and the guy's name is Peter Keating. And so Peter Keating is sort of a sellout, and he's always trying to please other people, and he doesn't have his own internal gauge of what's really good. He's always seeking approval from other people, especially from Howard Rourke, because Howard Rourke has artistic integrity, and he has his own vision of what he thinks that architecture should be. And Howard Rourke is very secure in his art. And so he's getting kicked out of school because he won't conform to the contemporary norms of the time, which in this case is sort of this classical motif that in the early 20th century it was really in vogue to sort of evoke these almost like these classical themes, these Baroque themes, these very ornate sort of structures with like pillars and like grapes and urns and like all this decorative stuff that was kind of more from like the Roman times or like from almost like with mythological types of motifs, which were not really integral to the building itself or the structure, but just sort of like these ornate sort of facades and entryways with, you know, this lavish bullshit basically. And like he saw it as just a sort of just amalgamation or conglomeration of just nonsense that people just eat up. Like the consumers, the consumers of architecture, namely people who could afford to erect a building in New York City, were paying top dollar for this kind of rubbish, and they didn't really know what they were getting into. They just were like, "Ooh, I like that. That's cute." But it didn't really have a whole lot of artistic merit to it. And so Howard Rourke knew that. And so he took more of a modernistic approach, but like it was almost very plain, and it was more like utilitarian. And so as him and his roommate are both leaving college, his roommate sort of graduating with honors and being directed already into like a major firm. And so the firm that he goes to work for after school, this is the Peter Keating, the sellout guy. He goes to work for a guy named Guy Francois. Some French sounding name. So Francois and Hire is the name of the company he goes to work for. And they specialize in all that new agey kind of but retro bullshit architecture that everybody seems to want. And Howard Rourke goes to work for a guy named Henry Cameron. And Henry Cameron was sort of the old guard. He was at one time the most successful architect in New York, and he had built some of the greatest buildings, the greatest structures. I can't remember the name of the. There was a building that he had designed that was like one of the biggest successes of the late 1800s. And so as the 20th century rolled around and people started consuming more bullshit and this sort of new wave of architecture hit, Guy Francois, who used to work for Henry Cameron, caught on to this sort of zeitgeist and capitalized on it and opened his own firm, and he became the most successful architecture firm in New York. And a lot of people liked it, but they didn't really know why. It was just sort of in vogue. And so the old guy, Henry Cameron, he kept doing what he was doing because he had integrity in his work. He believed in what he was doing, and he didn't like any of the new stuff. And so his business suffered, but he didn't care. He kind of went down with the ship. And at the point when Howard Rourke finally applies for the job, originally he turns him down. He's like, "Dude, you don't want to work for me. Like, go work for somebody else. Like, who do you think you are coming in here? Do you think that like I'm an easy place? Because whatever." I mean, at this point the guy's kind of almost a drunk, but he still does good work, and he's got like 2 people working for him. So Howard Rourke goes to work for this guy, and this guy really sees the talent in Howard Rourke, and he sees that he's sort of a reflection of himself, but he tries to dissuade him from working for him. He's like, "You don't want to work for me." He's like, "Look, you're fired, all right, and this is why. You don't want to work for me. I'd rather get you out now while I don't depend on you, because pretty soon if you keep working here, I'm going to depend on you. And I like your work, but your work is too good. You shouldn't be working for me. Go work for one of these big places. Go work for Guy Francois." And Howard Rourke's like, "Why would I want to do that?" And he's like, "Well, if you work for me, you're going to be poor. I'm not going to pay you very much. We're not going to design a lot of buildings, and you're just going to be a wasted talent." And he's like, "Well, that's what I want. I want to do good stuff." So already I'm starting to see why the leftists hate Ayn Rand so much. But so as they're progressing in their careers, um, this Peter Keating guy is really excelling in his company, a Guy Francone's company. And what he's doing is he's kind of scrambling over the other employees. As soon as he starts working there, he's like, okay, I want that guy's job. I'm going to take that guy's job. And he starts implementing these sort of Machiavellian sort of tactics to try to climb over people. And the boss, Guy Francone, takes notice of him. And he's like, I like that guy. He's ambitious. He's just like me. And so I talked earlier about in the last, what was the last book I was talking about? Can't remember now. Oh, I was talking about Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov, and how the one brother sort of he sort of gave up his fiance to hook up with this kind of dirty girl who was more his speed, and his brother sort of like was taking over his fiance. And I used the Dutch phrase "soort zoekt soort" to describe the idea that, like birds of a feather flock together kind of a thing, and how each one kind of gravitated or tended towards the mate that was really more in their league. And that's kind of what's happening in this story with Peter Keating going to work for Guy Francone, and for Howard Rourke to go and work for Henry Cameron, because they really are the embodiment of their employer. They're like the new face of their employer, both of them. So Howard Rourke is the new Henry Cameron, and Peter Keating is the new Guy Francone. And all of a sudden he's going to parties with Guy Francone, and they are securing these huge deals. And Howard Rourke and Henry Cameron, they are having their work rejected by certain people who want to build these buildings. And so one company is flourishing while the other one is languishing. And in the meantime, as Peter Keating is sort of getting these other like co-workers out of the way, like he convinces one guy to leave, the other guy gets fired. And so he, like, the guy who got fired, he ended up like taking over that guy's work. Like the guy had like a girlfriend that he was trying to impress, and he didn't want to work all the time. So Peter's like, "Oh no, go ahead and leave. I'll finish your, I'll finish your work. Don't worry. Just go have fun. Go hang out with your girlfriend. I'll finish this." And he would like do this other guy's work for him, to the point to where the company realized they didn't need that other guy, that this new guy had all this ambition and was finishing his work. But see, that's the problem. He was finishing the guy's work. It wasn't his work. He was putting the finishing touches and doing sort of the scut work for somebody else. And then the second guy that he sort of climbed over was like the main draftsman, and like all of the buildings that were being built were really his ideas. That Guy Francone actually had one huge success, and then after that sort of relegated his design work to like his employees. And so everything that came out of the company was sort of his flavor, but not really his work. And so he had one guy that was doing all the major work. And so Peter Keating saw a way to get that guy out of the way, when there was this really wealthy client that wanted this house built, or her husband was building her like a mansion, and Peter Keating went and like played golf with her and was like, "Look, I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. Guy Francone doesn't actually design the buildings." And she's like, "What?" And he says, "No, there's this guy that works there. He's I don't remember the guy's name, but he was like, it's this one guy's work. He does everything, and he's getting ready to start his own company," because the guy really wanted to start his own company. He wanted to kind of branch out on his own. He's like, "I can hook you up with that guy. It'd be way cheaper. You wouldn't have to pay Guy Francone prices, but you get Guy Francone work." And so the guy like already wants to go start his own business, and he sort of hooks him up with this job, and the guy's sort of suspicious of him. He's like, what's in it for you? And he's like, oh, you want my job, you dirty motherfucking bastard, you know. But so he didn't care because he was going to go off on his own anyway, but he saw Peter Keating for what he is. He's like, you are a sick bastard, you know, you are one fucked up dude. Like, I don't know how you live with yourself, but whatever, dude. And so he goes off and starts his own business. Does, you know, his first big job is, you know, this wealthy couple. And Peter Keating takes the guy's job, and so now he's the new designer at Guy Francone's firm. And so he goes in on his first day to start designing work. Guy Francone says, okay, well, we got another big job. He says, this is your first one. And with this one, what we're looking for is artistic integrity. He says, don't make it too fancy. Don't do all this lavish stuff we've been doing. These people want this one done a certain way, and just make it good. Let's see what you got, kid. And the guy sits down at the blank paper and doesn't really know what to do, because he's been told what to do his whole life, and his whole life has been revolved around getting getting approval from other people. And even all the way through school, even though he like thought he was better than Howard Rourke, he was always asking for Howard Rourke's approval and everything. And Howard Rourke isn't going to bullshit anybody. And so he would say, hey, Howard, do you like my new piece? And Howard would look at it and go, well, not really. And so he admired Howard Rourke because Howard Rourke was good, and he had the artistic integrity, and he knew what he wanted. And so now Peter Keating he goes through sort of like the company library and looks at all these different things and sort of puts this Frankenstein conglomeration of what he thinks his boss is going to want. But he's just not sure about it, because he's not sure of himself, and he's not sure of anything. And so he decides to go to Howard Rourke's apartment. His old roommate from college who got kicked out. And he goes up to his apartment, and the roof is leaking, and the guy's wearing like torn clothes and patches on his pants, and just kind of living in squalor, because he's working for this guy who's not doing a lot of business, but he does really good work. And so he shows him his plans, and he says, hey, you know, can you help me with this? I don't really know what to do with it. So Howard Rourke looks at it, he's like, really, dude? Alright, fuck, man. You've been copying my work all these years. Whatever, dude. So he, puts a piece of tracing paper on there. He kind of outlines his rough design, and then makes a bunch of changes. Just changes everything. And he's like, here, dude, do what you want with it. And so Peter Keating takes it home, and he finishes it, just like he finished the other guy's work, and makes it look really nice and presentable, and brings it to his boss. His boss is like, this is perfect. He's like, dude, it's like you read my mind. He's like, yeah, because I knew what you wanted. And his boss knows he's full of shit, but it's like he almost respects it, because he's exactly the same way. He's fake too. So he's this fake guy with this fake employee, and the fake employee went to the real guy and, got some help and made it good. And so he's thinking to himself, whatever, I don't even care if he plagiarizes it, as long as it's good. As long as I get what I want out of this dude. And he just plans on using this kid anyway. And what ends up happening later, and I'm not really at this point in my reading of the book, but in my, listening to the audio version, I come to find out that this Guy Francone guy has a daughter who doesn't like him very much. She kind of hates her dad, and he kind of hates her. And she's this sort of debutante, and he wants to hook her up with this new employee that he's got, because the new employee, he's like the future of the company. And so Peter Keating goes with him to these parties, and he introduces him to his daughter, and she's like whatever, not really into him, but you know, whatever, she'll talk to him. But what ends up happening is later in the story, uh, Howard Rourke ends up working at a quarry, and he's like busting boulders and stuff. And she and I think her father is it owns the quarry, and so she goes to the quarry and she sees Howard Rourke down there working, and she's like, you know, oh fuck that guy. You know, so basically she does. She seduces him, but she hates his guts, and she finds out that he is an architect and that his work is really good, but she hates him, and she sets out to destroy this guy, you know, while she's fucking his brains out. So like, he gets to kind of have his way with her, but she's out to destroy him, and she hates him, and he knows it, but he doesn't care. He's like, whatever, you know, he's just doing what he wants to do. And in the meantime, Peter Keating sort of has this girl he keeps going back to, who's kind of a pushover, but in a way, she is more like she's more like how Howard Rourke is in herself. Like it's not that she's complacent, but she is happy with who she is. She knows who she is, and she's kind of poor, and Peter Keating is sort of out of her league, and she knows it, and so when he comes by, she'll give him whatever he wants, and she tells him that she loves him in no uncertain terms. He's like, you know, you really shouldn't say that. Like, you shouldn't have your heart on your sleeve so much, you know, like, you sound like a loser, you know, like, you gotta play the game a little bit more, like, you know, hello, look at me, you know, like, you should, you know, you should be working a little bit harder to, you know, make sure that, you know, I don't walk away, because if you start throwing yourself at a guy like me, you know, I'm not going to be interested. But he is interested, and he keeps going back to her, because in a way he depends on her, and she kind of knows it, because she's the only one who really kind of just accepts him for who he is, because she doesn't really care that he's a piece of shit. And so, like, whatever she's getting out of the situation, you know, she's at peace with, and he keeps going over to her house and like confessing like what a horrible like piece of dog shit that he is. And like, he talks about, you know, he goes over there and tells her about how he scrambles over these other people at work and pushes people out of their jobs and takes their jobs, and she's like, yeah, well, she just listens, and he just keeps confessing, but he doesn't, it's almost like he does it despite himself. He doesn't mean to do it, and he wonders why she still accepts him, and he almost kind of pushes the boundaries of it. He keeps telling her more and more like horrible shit about himself. I don't know if he's hoping to scare her away. I think he feels dependent on her, so he doesn't want her to leave him, and she doesn't, but she's just sort of an anomaly to him. And she's living at this point with her uncle, because her parents died or whatever, and so her uncle, he actually is in the architecture industry, and he's an architecture journalist and writes reviews on these buildings that these guys are designing. And so he wrote this had written this review of a building that Peter Keating's company had produced, and it was like this glowing review, but in like, if you read the way it was worded, because it actually has a transcript of it in the book, it's not really that flattering. It's kind of like, yeah, well, these people really know how to follow the zeitgeist, you know, they know what people want, and they deliver, you know, what people want in abundance. But it's not really like praising the artistic integrity of the work. It's just showing how like sort of obedient they are to the zeitgeist. And he even says that there's symbolism in the building, and the symbolism in, you know, that's obvious in the structure of this building is how, you know, it represents egalitarianism, and he gives it this total like this socialist kind of a twist. Like, I don't know if the guy who's writing it is that. I mean, he seems to me like he might be a socialist, but I haven't really gotten far enough to really understand his political ideology at this point. But it sounds like he's giving this review of this building as if the building somehow is the edifice that embodies the ideals of socialism. That, one person, this building represents that one person can't get too far above any other person just because of the way that the stories of the building are floors 3 through 39 are all completely equal, and everything below that is spread out, and just the way he describes it in these sort of egalitarian terms that would appeal to the socialist mindset. And when the guy from the company reads it, he's like, I don't really understand that part. I don't really know what he's talking about, but it looks positive to me, so let's celebrate and have some champagne. Like, all they care about is that there was a review written by this guy in this paper, and it was flattering. So, I think that Peter Keating kind of understood it a little bit more than his boss did, and understood that it wasn't really flattering to the work itself, and he kind of knew that, but the boss seemed kind of oblivious to it, or he just didn't care, one of the two. And so I guess that's about where I'm at in that book. I didn't really get much further than that, but that is I look forward to reading more of Ayn Rand. I'm starting to understand a little bit more of her political ideology, which tends towards capitalism and individuality and individualism as opposed to collectivism. And that's why I think most left-leaning people hate Ayn Rand. I couldn't figure it out at first. I've seen people on the internet like call her a fascist, and I don't see it. I don't see fascism in what she represents. But what I do see is this sort of free market capitalism and individualism, and I can see why leftists don't like that, because they like collectivism and socialism, and so it kind of goes against those ideals, and it's sort of like meritocracy, like the ultimate meritocracy seems to be what her work represents, is like the individual sort of eschewing the public acceptance that comes along with obedience, which is, if you look at modern day leftism, that's what it's all about. It's being accepted by the herd, and being, being allowed to be part of the club when it comes to, this whole, woke orthodoxy that's out there, and you can't dare, to breach the rules that they set out for you. Like, you need to follow those rules, and the rules change every day, and you need to stay up on what the new rules are. And so I can see why people that fall for an ideology like that wouldn't like the work of Ayn Rand, because Ayn Rand is like, you be yourself and find out who it is that you are, and what your purpose is in the world. And I'm almost kind of thinking about, like, I'm seeing it almost as like in a Crowleyan way, like how Aleister Crowley says, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, and which a lot of times gets misinterpreted as to just do whatever you feel like doing, which isn't what that phrase means. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law means you find out what it is that your purpose is as an individual, and you fulfill that, and that's your will. Your will is peculiar to only you, and it doesn't change. It's not something that changes day to day, like, oh, just whatever I feel like. Oh, today I feel like being a butterfly. Oh, today I feel like being a unicorn, and just being all of that. That's not what do what thou wilt means. Do what thou wilt means that you have a peculiar and special, like you have an individual purpose, like, in the world that nobody else has. Like, as a spiritual being, you have a spiritual purpose And once you become in tune with that and locked in with that, you have no choice but to follow only that. So that's what do without wilt means. And so, in a way, that's kind of like what Ayn Rand is saying, is that you find out where you fit in, where your niche is, and you be the best at that. And that if everybody was to do that, we would have a better society, because the society would be built on individuals with that each fill their own spot in the world, that everybody has their own part to play, and that each one should perfect, their own station, so to speak. And once that happens, then we can function as a society. That seems to be, from my point of view, what I'm seeing. And I haven't read a lot of Ayn Rand yet, but just from what I'm gathering from this book, The Fountainhead, that seems to be where it's pointing, is the idea of the ultimate meritocracy, is that you take that one thing that you love and you be the best at it. And yeah, I can see why leftists hate that idea, because it goes against everything that they stand for, which is that everybody gets, an equal share of the pie, no matter how much, no matter what they contribute, or no matter what their talent is, or how lazy they are, or how stupid they are, or how smart they are. They all should end up with the same thing. And I mean, gosh, what kind of life is that? Who the hell would want that? I can't imagine why anybody would think that that was good, but that's just me. Alright, well, that's it for The Fountainhead. Clive Barker, The Great and Secret Show. I read it when I was in 9th grade, so what was that, like 89? What is it now, 2023? That was a long time ago. So I still remembered a lot of it. I went back and I read like the first few chapters just recently, and I don't remember the entire book, but I always kind of remember the beginning. I still, to this day, I don't remember what happens later, but it's a pretty weird book, man. I actually, the reason I know about it is because Clive Barker did a book signing at Tower Records at the time that it came out, and a couple of my friends wanted to go because they were into his graphic novels that he had, and they were all into comic books and stuff. And so I was more like bookish and into like Stephen King and stuff like that. Now I remembered that when I went to go visit a friend of my brother's, a guy that we knew in Germany. Like, we lived in Bitburg and this guy lived in Ramstein, and my brother was friends with him. And as we moved to California, it turns out his family moved to Vacaville, and so his name was Chris, and so we went to go visit him, and he was like, "Oh, you like Stephen King?" He's like, "Have you ever heard of Clive Barker?" He's like, "He's way better, way more scary, And so he told me about the book Cabal, which was adapted for the movie Nightbreed, and not too long after this book came out, I remember the movie Nightbreed came out, and I went and saw it, and I didn't like it so much. And as I got to read Clive Barker a bit, I didn't like his style as much as I liked Stephen King at the time. It is his sort of brand of horror is a little bit more like sort of esoteric, and it's got this kind of occult kind of vibe to it. And so there's a lot of magic in there, and he's Skittles, so there's a lot of sexual deviancy going on. And in some of his books, like, I remember there was, like, in his graphic novel, there was a scene where these two dudes were, like, BFing in the cornfields. And I was making fun of my friend. I was like, "Why'd you buy this book with these two dudes BFing in the cornfields?" And there's a little bit of that in the Great and Secret Show as well. It just kind of pops up here and there. And this book, it starts out in the mailroom. It's like there's a mailbox on the front, okay? And so it starts out in the dead letter office of the Omaha, Nebraska post office. And this guy, his name is Jaffe, is his name. I can't remember what his first name is. I always think of Al Jaffe from Mad Magazine. But I can't remember the guy's. Something Jaffe. I'll find it. I can't even read this right now without my glasses. They just call him Jaffe. Randolph Jaffe. And so he gets a job in the dead letter office, and his job is to like pick through mail and like find like dollar bills or like whatever in there. Like I really doubt this job even exists. It like Clive Barker's kind of funny because he was a young writer and he had already written several novels by the time this one came out. This was like probably his fourth or fifth novel, and still when he appeared and when I saw him at the book signing, he was really fresh faced, like really young looking dude, not a gray hair in his head, not balding in any way. Like he was a young sprout, and so this character, this Randolph Jaffe guy, he works in the dead letter office in Omaha, Nebraska, and his job is to pick through mail and find like trinkets and dollar bills and stuff and just kind of collect it for the post office. And the dead letter office is what happens when, I guess, anyway, in this book, when, say, if a letter gets sent to the wrong address and it gets sent back to the post office. Sometimes it just goes back and forth between post office all over the country and eventually winds up in Omaha, Nebraska in the dead letter office. So it's kind of like a graveyard for letters, kind of like how like there's like a car graveyard for, like fucked up cars. And so so this guy's picking through all the mail, and he reads through it. He has to read through all these letters, and so he's reading through these letters, and he starts to detect like a certain like communication that's going on between different practitioners of what he calls the art. Okay, and so what it is it's like this occult group that he becomes aware of through reading all this mail. And it's not really like determined whether or not the guy's just kind of crazy and he's just kind of piecing it together in his head, but he's getting all these signs, and it's almost like they're talking to him and they're trying to sort of bring him into it. And so he does end up going a little bit crazy. His boss comes in and yells at him one day, and he like kills his boss and like torches the post office and just leaves. And so, throughout, it's kind of known that this guy's got a little bit of a murderous personality. And then, so, I guess he doesn't leave any trail of himself. Like, he burns down the whole post office. I don't know if just the one guy dies or how many people die in this, but he's sort of on the run, and it seems as if nobody is really onto him. And so he's gotten away with it. And his conscience is like, he doesn't give a fuck. He doesn't. It's not like Crime and Punishment where the dude's like being tormented by the fact that he killed these women. It's more like this guy like killed, and it was completely within his nature to do it. And so he didn't have any remorse whatsoever. And he sort of like traveled the country. And as he traveled the country, he would encounter certain people, and just like the sort of wildness in his eyes, and he just sort of had this hunger for the art, as it's called, because he sort of tuned into this sort of esoteric group that was, into the great work or whatever, kind of a Crowleyan type of thing. And so, like, he encounters a few people on his travels. He, finds this woman and has, like, a little fling with her. And he finds a man and has a fling with him. So there's the whole Skittles aspect kind of comes around. And there's this one scene where he like locks himself in this motel room and like lays down on the floor like totally naked and like lets the cockroaches run all over him, and he gets like sexual gratification from it. So it's, like I said, so it's sexual deviancy, throughout. And there, like it while he's at that hotel, he kind of awakens out of his slumber after he lets these cockroaches like climb all over his dick for like 6 hours, and then like he goes for this walk. I guess he's in like New Mexico or something, and he walks out into the desert, and he's like barefoot, right? So he's getting sunburned and he's barefoot, and it becomes nighttime or whatever, and he gets into this area. He's drawn towards this area where like what it he calls it a loop, like a time loop or something. And so he kind of like walks into this area where like reality is sort of gyrating and there's these waves going on, and he walks into this time loop, and there's this guy, this old man named like Kassoon or whatever I think is the guy's name, and he's living in a little hut, and he's like in there like in a loincloth, you know, in his BO and everything, and he like goes in there and he talks to the guy, and the guy is actually a part of this sort of magical cabal or whatever, and I forget what he calls the guy. He's called shoot, what was it called? I remember I had to look the word up, and like the word meant like a school of fish, but I can't remember what the shoal was what it was called. I was like, what's a shoal? And I looked it up, and according to like Google online definitions, it just gave me pictures of like schools of fish, but somehow this guy was part of a shoal is what it's called in the book, and I'm guessing it's a division of this magical group, this esoteric group. And so anyway, so the guy like he says, I want to learn this thing, and I want to learn the art, and the guy's like not so sure about it, and the guy wants to like have sex with him or something, and I think they do something. I don't know what they do. I guess they go out in the cornfields and BF each other like the comic book, but yeah, I guess they do something. But then the guy wants to like occupy his body. He's like, I'll teach you, but you have to let me borrow your body for a while. And so like he's like, hell no, I'm not gonna let you borrow my body. And like he's gonna kill the guy. Like he wants to murder the dude because he's just like likes to kill. I guess he's just interested in kill. He likes to kill and let cockroaches run on his dick, and he likes to have sex with dudes. Total Clive Barker stuff. And so like he takes like a knife out of like a pocket knife, and he's gonna shank the guy. And the guy like kind of grabs him, and he like starts breathing into his face, and he's breathing his life force into Jaffe's body. And he feels the guy like entering him, and the guy's going to occupy his body. I don't know what he's going to do, if he's going to go like rob a bank or go kill some people or have sex with some dudes or whatever it is that Clive Barker imagines this guy wants to do. But Jaffe feels this guy like trying to enter into him, and he just like freaks out and panics and like pushes the guy away and like leaves the hut and leaves the the time loop, or whatever it is. It's like he's kind of like he's moving like through molasses, like the air is waving, and it's like this weird sticky kind of thing where it's like almost kind of drawing him back, but he's got to like kind of plow through it like he's swimming, like when you swim in a dream, and it's like, or if you ever like are in a fight in a dream and you try to punch somebody and your like fist is moving really slow and it barely makes contact, like it's that kind of thing. And so he's like escapes this time loop, but at least he knows about it. And so the guy kind of tells him a few things while he's in there, and he tells him about quiddity. And what quiddity is in the book is it's the sea of quiddity, and quiddity is they say you go there 3 times in your life, something like the day you're born, the first time you have sex or something, and then like when you die or something like that. It's something weird, something goofy, but like quiddity is like this magical sea of power, I guess. And so this guy wants to go there and like own it. It's like he has this sort of greedy drive for power, this kind of will to power, and he wants to be able to control quiddity. And so that's like his will to power. And so it's this kind of evil kind of, he's just sort of like, one of the I guess like in the occult they call it like the Dark Brothers or something. Like he wants to basically practice like black magic, and so it's kind of ego serving and evil, and he's not really doing anything for any good. But what he wants to do is he wants to perfect the art so that he can have control of quiddity. And so he gets in contact with this sort of disgraced college professor named Fletcher. And Fletcher has been exiled from the, from the college community. I guess he had like a drug addiction. So he was like doing all this research in what do you call it? Like evolutionary research. And he was like top dog at this university for evolutionary research. But then he was sort of disgraced because of his drug addiction, and he was, kind of kicked out. And so Jaffe sort of found out about this guy, sort of just through the channels, he was meeting people on the road, and there were certain people that were kind of pointing him in the direction of this art that he wants to learn. And so he kind of hooks up with Jaffe, and he uses his influence, his newfound sort of powerful personal, he's got all this personal power now that he's kind of accumulated from being driven towards the art and having killed these people. It's like his evil is sort of growing, and so he manipulates this Fletcher guy into helping him to develop this evolutionary potion called the Nuncio. And what the Nuncio does is it like and the guy's like, he sets the guy up in a lab, and he's giving the guy a bunch of drugs, and he's got the guy working for him almost like a slave to develop this evolutionary potion called the Nuncio, which progresses evolution in biological beings. And so the guy's like testing it on this monkey, and at the present point in the story where him and Fletcher, they're like down in Mexico, and they've got this sort of like a Catholic mission location that's sort of remote on the coast, on the Pacific coast. And the guy's like got his lab set up there, and he's testing the Nuncio on this monkey named Raul, who evolves into like a human boy. And the boy calls him father and all this stuff, and like it's kind of a half monkey, half boy. And he refers to Fletcher as father, and Fletcher's like, "I'm not your father," da 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 da. And so Fletcher's a little bit of like kind of an old hippie. And of course, like, Jaffe and Fletcher are probably banging each other in the butt too, because it's Clive Barker, and that's just what you get with Clive Barker. And so, so he's got this guy working for him to develop this Nuncio thing, and the guy, as the work is resolving, like as he's finishing up the work, he realizes that Fletcher is going to use it for evil instead of for good, and that he's going to use it to sort of take over the world. And so he realizes that he needs to destroy this thing that he created. And so he starts working to destroy it, and he sends the monkey boy out back to sort of set fire to the building, and it's not really working. Like, he knows that Jaffe's coming back, because Jaffe can sense it. He's like, this guy, I don't trust him. I already feel like he's going to try to undermine the project. And so he starts heading back. He's like, and he already kind of knows the guy's doing it, and he's like prepared to kill the guy. He's got a gun, and Fletcher's got a gun, and Fletcher's his plan is to kill the boy, dispose of the body so that nobody sees this evolved monkey that's wearing clothes like a kid, like the body of this evolved monkey. So he doesn't want anybody to know what's happened. He wants to destroy the Nuncio. And so Jaffe returns, finds Fletcher trying to destroy everything, and like they get in a fight. And I think that actually by the time he gets there, the Nuncio's already gotten to Fletcher. So Fletcher was going to destroy the Nuncio, and as he reached out for it, it sort of burst through the test tube and attached itself to his skin and started working on him. So it started evolving him because it was finished. It was complete. And so when Jaffe gets there and he bursts in, he sees Fletcher sitting there, and there's something weird about Fletcher. He's like, what the fuck, man? He seems like just like himself, but amplified. And so almost as it kind of almost compares it to like a mescaline trip or something. You know how like if you take like hallucinogenic psilocybin mushrooms, it just kind of intensifies your personality. And so like he sees this guy and he sees that he is speaking to him not with his mouth. He's speaking to him like through his eyes and through his body language. And so like they've got this telepathy going on already because Fletcher can communicate with them non-verbally. And so Jaffe finds himself near the nuncio, sees the nuncio, he goes for it, the nuncio jumps on him as well. And so they both become sort of infected with this, evolutionary potion, which turns you into a higher being. And so they both, like, even in their corporeal form, they're like struggling and wrestling, but there's also these kind of spiritual versions of themselves kind of hovering above, and they're fighting too. And so their sort of evolved spirits get into this battle, this war, and it's like this battle that takes place over the entire United States, and it's changing like power dynamics with this and with that. It's changing the weather. People are acting weird, dogs and cats living together, weird shit happening all over the country. And so like there's all this kind of strife going on, and it's because these two were battling it out in this sort of spiritual battle of good and evil. So Fletcher's like Fletcher's not really good. He's just kind of a hippie. So like I guess since he's a total liberal, he's like he's got a ponytail and shit, and he's a college professor. So I guess he's good. But Jaffe's bad because Jaffe's the hyper masculine sort of killer kind of sexual deviant guy. And so they're battling, and they're battling over the whole United States, and they're kind of doing it like in the sky, but they're also doing it in the water, and they're sort of using all the elements as sort of a medium for this battle. And they actually create these armies of themselves, and they have like it's like an army of ideas, and their ideas are battling. Their creations, they're sort of their spiritual creations that they've created through their imagination. Those are fighting as well. So there's this huge war going on. It's really strange the way that Clive Barker describes this part, because it's kind of hard to describe in itself, but in a way it's kind of a neat idea. It's kind of a novel idea, and he describes it really well in the story. Okay, sorry, I just had to cut the tape real quick. So anyway, so they have this battle going on, and meanwhile there is this little town called Paloma Grove, California, and there's these 4 girls that are kind of like, it's a hot day, and it's sort of like a mountainous town. It almost kind of like, the way it's described kind of reminds me a little bit of like Amador, and but it's more like a coastal town. So it's like a coastal town. I don't know if Paloma Grove's a real town or not. I've never seen it, but it's like San Luis Obispo, Pismo Beach kind of area, I guess, or like Monterey or something. But it's sort of a little bit of a mountain town on the coast. And so these 4 girls, it's a hot day, and they're kind of walking around not knowing what to do. They're kind of wanting to cool off, but like nothing's good. Their lives are boring. They're bickering. It's hot, da-da-da. And they kind of go into a wooded area, like in the hills, and I guess it had been storming for several nights before, and they find this body of water, like a little lake that had been formed by the storm. Like, so there was some flooding that happened, and there's this little area, they found this lake, and it just looks so refreshing for them. And so they decide to go swimming. And it's funny because they take off their clothes to go swimming, and there's this kid from the neighborhood, and he can see them, and he's hiding, he's peeping on them. He's like a voyeur. So again, Clive Barker and his sexual deviancy. there's this like he's like a 10-year-old kid, and he's like watching these girls undress and get in the water, and he's like, sitting in the reeds, like, and so he's really getting off on it or whatever. But what happens is that they swim out into the water. It turns out the water is really deep. It's not even a very big body of water. It describes the lake as being like 50 feet across, which isn't very big for a lake. But I guess it's really deep. I guess it's kind of like in not a ravine, but sort of a chasm in the ground. Like there's these underground caves. But somehow it all filled with water, and they're swimming in it. And Jaffe and Fletcher's spirits are in the water. And so the girls, they're swimming, and they love it. It's so refreshing and cool water and da 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 da. But as they're swimming, they start kind of getting a little bit scared. Like they try to touch the bottom and they realize how deep it is. They're like, "Wow, this water is really deep. This is kind of crazy." And one of the girls gets sucked into the water, and then another girl, and all at the same time, they all get attacked, sort of underwater, and they're being actually raped by the spirits of Jaffe and Fletcher. And so they think they're gonna die. They're like held underwater, and they're being violated physically, and the kid who's sort of beaten off in the bushes, like he's watching. I mean, he sees that something's wrong. Like he sees that they're like, it looks like they're drowning, and he's freaking out because he's like, I can't believe I'm seeing this. Like I can't tell anybody about this. What am I gonna say? I was peeping on these girls, and something happened. So the spirits of Jaffe and Fletcher, they kind of finish their business with the girls, and they, the girls kind of come up like at the last second, and they're like puking up water, and they're like, oh my god, and they like, they like dog paddle out to the, to the edge of the water, and they're like sitting there, and they're like, oh my god, what the fuck just happened? And the girl, one of the girls has the guts to actually say, I felt something up inside me, like there's somebody down there, something down there. And one girl's like totally in denial, and she's like, don't be ridiculous, you're not making any sense, Becky, or whatever. I don't remember what their names are. But so this thing happened to them in the water, and it was Jaffe and Fletcher who did it. And so I think what they were trying to do was they were trying to, because they have this spiritual battle going on, they wanted to sort of corporealize their legacy into these girls. And so they impregnated the girl. I guess they didn't really impregnate them, but what they did was they sort of possessed the girls in a way. And so the girls, they made a pact not to talk about it because they didn't want everybody to think they were crazy. And so the boy, he sees what's going on. He hears them talking about all this shit, and he like leaves, and they kind of hear him leave. And one girl's like, something's watching us, like there's somebody in the bushes. But he doesn't reveal his identity. So the girls kind of go about their lives, and they actually stop talking to each other. It's like they have more reason than ever not to really associate. But each one of them is sort of on a mission to get pregnant, is what happens. And so they all kind of go their own separate ways. Like one girl is actually kind of jealous of the pretty girl's like association with this kind of town hunky dude, and has like a crush on the guy, and she just goes over to his house and she's like, I love you, just take me, like you can have me if you want me. And the guy's like, really? She's like, yeah, let's just, she's just totally blunt about what she wants to do. And so they have a fling that lasts a few days, and he gets her pregnant. And then there's another girl who like seduces, like, it's the big girl. One of the girls is a fat girl, and so she sort of seduces the old man that lives next door, and goes over to his house for like a week, and just like they just have this thing going, and he gets her pregnant. And then there's the pretty girl who her situation's a little bit different, and she ends up going down to this sort of biker bar on the coast, and she just lets these bikers just line up and just drill her right on the floor of this bar. And she does it for like a week. She's like sneaking off. Her parents like, where are you going? And she goes down, she drives her parents' car down to this bar and just gets railed by all these bikers. And her dad ends up showing up like on like the fourth or fifth, maybe sixth day of it. Her dad comes down there and he like comes through and he's like, that's my daughter. And everybody's like, hey, wait your turn, dude. You know, like we're fucking this girl. And so like, her dad like, you know, throws a blanket over her and pulls her outside and pulls her to his car. And he's like, why are you doing this? I don't understand. And she's like, what are you talking about? Like she's just totally out of it. And so she's kind of the one that blows everybody's cover because this thing becomes like a scandal, like a news sensation because it's a small town and everybody's talking about it. Everybody's talking about this you know hometown sweetheart that, you know, the prom queen that like went down to the biker bar and got railed by like 100 dudes, you know. And so like, and she did it for like 5 days straight. And then there was the fourth girl. I don't remember her situation exactly. She ended up getting pregnant too. I don't remember what happened with the other girl. I can't remember. But she ends up getting pregnant too. Oh yeah, what she does is she finds like this Hispanic gardener, like a young landscaper in the neighborhood. She seduces him and he gets her pregnant. So anyway, so they all get pregnant except the one girl who does all the bikers. That girl isn't able to get pregnant. She's like barren or whatever. But she goes crazy is what happens because she was possessed, and you know, they all were sort of possessed. And I don't know what happened with the spirits of Jaffe and Fletcher, if they just like left the seed in them, like maybe it was some kind of like a kind of spiritual seed. I don't think that they left any like remnants of themselves in the girls. Like they weren't occupying the bodies of the girls themselves. But I think that they had left this kind of demon seed in the girls, and then the girls had to go and sort of consummate the affliction, so to speak, by getting pregnant, and then they were complete with this, progeneration of the spirits of Jaffe and Fletcher. And I don't know at this point, like, whether Jaffe and Fletcher both impregnated each girl, or if, you know, like, Jaffe got 2 of them and Fletcher got 2 of them, or what. But the one girl didn't get pregnant, the biker bar chick, but she ended up going crazy, and she went to like a mental hospital, and it was through her ramblings and like the psychiatrist sort of publication of the event that sort of brought all the attention. And it sort of created this fervor in the town, like everybody knew what was going on. They called this group of girls, they called them the League of Virgins is what they were called. And there was even people from out of town who were coming to visit the town, like tourists would come to the biker bar, you know, to see the bar where the girl, like, you know, the spot where she was lying down. Oh, well, there it is, you know. And it just became like a big scandal because this is supposed to take place in like 1970. And so I guess for 1970, like a girl getting railed at a biker bar was like something like, you know, not normal. Like today, like, I don't even think anybody would care. But I guess in 1970 it was a big scandal. And so, so yeah, I mean, and it affected the families of the girls, and the girls themselves didn't even really care about any of it. They didn't really care about all the attention they were getting. They didn't care that everybody was talking about them. It was just, they just had to complete that mission, and once they did, they just kind of didn't really let it affect them personally. As much as people were talking about them, it didn't really get to them. They didn't care. And okay, so the big girl, I think she had her baby and then killed it and then killed herself. So she killed the baby and then killed herself. So there was 2 girls that didn't successfully procreate. And then one girl had twins, and then the other girl moved out of town. with her baby. So like they all had their babies or whatever. But the only girl, there was only one girl left in town, and I think she was the one that had the twins. I think that's how it went. Could have been the other way around. I don't remember. So anyway, so that's about as far as I got, I think, in the story. Was the end of that chapter on the League of Virgins. And so I'll have to... It's been 35 years since I read this book. So, like, I don't remember exactly, like, what happens after that in the story. But for some reason, I kind of remembered it up till there, like, when I first read it. I think maybe the rest of the story is not as interesting or something, but... Anyway, it's a pretty thick book, so, you know, you can see where I'm at in the book. Not a lot, you know, not a lot read there. But yeah, that's that one. I'll get back to that one a little bit later once I get a little bit further in it, and I'll tell you guys about it some more. But until then, I will see you later. Okay, so this book, Stranger in a Strange Land, by Robert Heinlein. I've spoke about this one in 2 other episodes, episode 5 and 9, and so I'll go into a little bit more here. I haven't really read a whole lot of it. I think I'm like about 110 pages into it, so I don't know the whole story yet, so don't spoil it for me. But as it starts out in the beginning, I'll just kind of recap because I've gone through some of it in the earlier episodes, but I'll go through it again, just kind of summarize what I've read so far because there's not a lot. So it starts out with this Mars expedition where it's set in the future in our world, and so we've sent... this expedition to Mars to colonize Mars, and so the first ship that was sent was called the Envoy, and aboard the ship were several, you know, professors and experts from, you know, high levels of academia that were sent out to do this mission. Each person specializing in different fields of study, and so they sent out actually married couples of experts. And so, you know, there was a huge screening process that was involved in sending these people out. And so they did the expedition. They landed. I don't know if they crash landed or what, but there was no communication after their landing between us and them. So we didn't really know what had happened. And so it was just like, well, we sent the ship. We haven't heard anything back. We're just going to assume they're dead. So at another point, I think that we'd sent like an unmanned ship called the Zombie, and it reported the wreckage, but really nothing else. No survivors or whatever. And so several years later, we sent another ship called the Champion, and headed by Captain Von Tromp. And so his voyage went to go try and examine whatever wreckage there was to see if there were any survivors. It turns out there was one. And then they left some colonists behind as well on that Champion voyage. And so the only surviving member from the original crew was this man, Valentine Michael Smith, who is later called Mike in the story. And so they bring Mike back to Earth. And, you know, it's a long trip or whatever. And at this point, I've kind of ascertained that he's about 18 or 19 years old. But they describe him as the man from Mars. And, like, I don't know. At first, I'd kind of pictured, like, this kind of Jason Momoa-looking guy. Maybe it's because of some kind of, like, bias that I had from... What was that John Travolta space movie from that Isaac Asimov? Battlefield Earth? L. Ron Hubbard. Not Isaac Asimov. That was L. Ron Hubbard. Wrote Battlefield Earth. The book was like freaking... It was like twice the size of War and Peace. Like, it was just this ridiculous book, like 2,000 pages. I guess L. Ron Hubbard had a habit of when he would write, he didn't really proofread or edit anything. He'd just keep writing. And so he had this like super long, long-winded book that came out. And then I guess they made a really horrible movie about it. And I never saw the movie, but I've seen pictures. And in, the stills I've seen from the movie, John Travolta looks just completely ridiculous. He kind of looks like a cross between like Jonathan Davis from Korn and like Jason Momoa, kind of, but then still John Travolta. And so anyway, so that's kind of how, in a way, I pictured this man from Mars, this Valentine Michael Smith to be. But so at the beginning of the story, they kind of give the backdrop. They talk about the first voyages, and then he comes back. And so this is just in the first 10 pages. He comes back, he returns, Captain Von Tromp is there, with all his medals and everything, and he's just, he's in charge. It's his brainchild, sort of, this whole voyage. And they got the man from Mars, so they rescued this guy who was living there among the Martians. See, in this book, which was written when, they still believed there were 1961. So at the time of this writing, apparently it was believable to have a book with a Martian race living on planet Mars. And Valentine Michael Smith lived among the Martians. And not very much was said about them at this juncture in the book. But they're described a little bit later. And the way the Martians are described is like the young. There's sort of a differentiation between the young ones and like the old ones. And the young ones are called like nymphs or something, or fairies, or I think it's nymphs. And the nymphs are sort of just these sort of sprightly beings that just kind of do whatever, and they kind of flit around and act goofy. And then the old ones are like, how like on the Dark Crystal there's the ancient mystics, and they're all solemn and like they don't really talk very much, and they're spiritual and all that stuff. And so that's how the old ones are with the Martians. It doesn't really describe their physical appearance so much, but one of the things that is said about them is that as they're nymphs, they're basically feminine in character, and then as they become older, they're masculine in character, because there's not the male-female dichotomy that we have on Earth to procreate. I guess their procreation happens in a different way. They don't have sex. And so I don't remember exactly how they multiply, but maybe I forgot. I don't know. But anyway, so Valentine Michael Smith, he's back to Earth, and it's this big sensation, and it's this big news story. But as he's been delivered to this hospital, none of the press are allowed to see him. And so they don't let anybody come in for interviews. He's really under lock and key. And there's certain experts in military personnel and like government workers who are able to kind of see him, but very few people. And of course the hospital staff are able to see him. And so there's this woman who works in the hospital, and her name is Jillian Boardman is her name. And she's just, kind of a young nurse. She's, into men, and she likes to date and, be coquettish, and she's got her little thing going. And she's dating several dudes, and like one of the guys she's dating is a reporter. He's a journalist. And he wants to get in, well, I guess she hasn't, let him get in her yet, but like he wants to get into the hospital to see Mike, Valentine Michael Smith, the man from Mars, and he wants to like interview him and stuff. But she's like, well, I can't, put my job on the line for you, like I like you and everything. We can go have a steak, but I'm not going to risk my job sneaking you in there. So he gives her like a bug, like a wire, like a recording device to plant in the room next door, and the plan almost kind of unravels. I think she gets some recorded material and submits it to him, But one of the things about how the hospital is dealing with Mike is that no women are allowed to see him, but she kind of sneaks in there on a day, and I think that maybe it was kind of an accident. She wound up in the room, and he's kind of blown away by her because she's a woman and he's never seen a woman before. I don't know that she even knows that she's not supposed to be there, but anyway, so she has an encounter with him, not a sexual encounter, just a sort of. I mean, she kind of almost does in a way. She kind of teases him a little bit. She's about to flash her boobs or something, but it doesn't happen. But she ends up leaving and she goes on a date with her reporter boyfriend, and he wants to, get into the hospital somehow and see him because he sees that the possibilities of the exploitation of this guy that can be happening by the government, because as he's studied the law and stuff like that, he has realized that as an original human colonist of planet Mars, that this Valentine Michael Smith guy might have some claim to Mars, to ownership of Mars, actually, as a colonist anyway. I mean, there's already an indigenous race there, but as far as we're concerned, since he was the original colonist, and he did not actually swear in any of the new colonists that came on the Champion, that he actually by law has certain rights, and not only property rights, as he had rich parents and a rich family and money invested in the government that is rightfully his, but he also, by current legal standards, actually is like the king of Mars and actually has legal rights to it. And so what's happening is the government is trying to keep him under lock and key. And so this is what did I say? It was 1961, 1962, 1961. There's already fake news. So they create fake news and they bring out a guy who's not really the man from Mars. He's like it's an actor. They send out this, they put him on TV. They're like, ladies and gentlemen, the man from Mars, and they're showing this guy who's not really him. And Jillian, since she's the only civilian who's seen him, she's out to dinner with her journalist boyfriend. His name is Ben Caxton, is the guy's name. So her and Ben are at this restaurant, and so they see it not on the TV. It's more like this 3D kind of projected thing that is shown through like a tank, like a water tank. And so they actually project the 3D image into the water, and that's how they watch TV, because it's future, and they got to have some groovy technology. So they're watching the hollow tank, I think is what they call it, and they see this character who's being wheeled out as Valentine Michael Smith. Well, it's not really him, and Jillian noticed. She said, "That's not him. I know that's not him because I've seen him." So she kind of has to sort of fess up that she's seen him, and what happens is that Ben realizes that they are going to keep this guy locked away, might actually put him like in a nursing home, fill him full of drugs and never let him out, that he might be basically kept prisoner by the government, and they're going to trot out this other dude like he's the man from Mars, because they don't want the legal battle of having to fight for ownership of the entire planet, which this guy, by all legal rights, currently in the story, that he has legal right to Mars, and they're trying to get out of it, so they're going to try and stuff this guy. And so what happens is Ben Caxton, the journalist boyfriend guy, he sort of demands, he's got, he's a relatively well-known journalist, and he brings some lawyers along with him and demands to see the man from Mars and to interview him. And he kind of puts his reputation on the line. Like, he kind of accuses them of like hiding him and trotting out this fake, and they're like, look, you're looking at a pretty big libel suit, because of the stuff that you're saying right now. And so he kind of puts his career on the line and goes in to see, this man from Mars. They show him the actor, not the real guy. He meets with the actor, and he's in a bed. He's strapped in a bed, but it's like some other dude that they've got in there. And I don't know if it's just maybe some other patient, like a mental patient, who is just kind of out of it, some crazy guy, or if it's really, a trained actor. Or maybe he's, been like MK Ultra and he's been hypnotized to think he's this man from Mars. But there's a guy there. And he kind of goes a little bit unprepared, sort of without a real plan, because he doesn't really know what the real Valentine Michael Smith looks like. And so he's just taking his girlfriend's word for it. And he can't really prove it's not him. And so, he kind of is kicking himself, going, damn it, and they make him leave. And he's like, I didn't really get what I wanted out of that whole thing. So he realizes that he's going to have to go higher up the food chain and sort of like start knocking on some higher doors. He's, what is it like? What do they call it? The chain of command. He's going higher up the chain of command. And so he calls up the Secretary General, who's basically like the president of the World Federation. Because here's another aspect of this story, is that it actually is a globalist government that they have going on. And so it's called the Federation, and America, and the story is sort of subsumed into the Federation. It's kind of like the UN. So basically it's kind of like if the UN had subsumed the United States, and we were still America, but we were under the auspices of the UN, which is pretty much kind of how it is. But so there's a little bit of that sort of foreshadowing as far as historical significance. And actually, there is a reference made to H.G. Wells's book War of the Worlds, which I haven't read yet. But if you're into the whole conspiracy, one world government thing, H.G. Wells, played a huge part in the, sort of concocting of that goal, and sort of, he wrote a lot on how, that would come to be. And so there's a whole trail of books that you can read, starting kind of with him, maybe earlier. Of course, you've got, the whole, the Cliveden set and the, Milner group and all that stuff. And so he was sort of writing about this stuff as if it was fiction. And of course, Aldous Huxley kind of did the same thing with Brave New World. He wrote Brave New World as if it's a fiction, but later he, in interviews and in talks that he gave at universities, he said, no, this is how it is. This is not a work of fiction. I'm describing for you the future that's laid out for mankind. And so H.G. Wells had let a lot of that information out as well, the same way Aldous Huxley did. So references made in the book to H.G. Wells. There's a global government in the book. And of course there's this, trip to Mars. So we've got Elon in here, in a way. But yeah, the only difference is there's this race of indigenous Martians that, probably is not real. But who knows? I mean, maybe Elon will find the man from Mars. So, so where I was Ben Caxton had decided that he had to go further up the chain of command in order to sort of like get the truth about, because he wants to expose that the government is hiding the real Valentine Michael Smith. And so he starts harassing the Secretary General, which is basically like he's going after like the president of the UN, or whatever, the president of the Federation. And so what happens is that he's in like this kind of hovercraft. It's like these taxis that they have, these cabs that are self-driving cabs that fly through the air. Okay, because it's it's science fiction. So of course they got flying cars. And so this flying car, so like he's using the phone, it's like a speaker phone. So it's like basically, you talk to somebody and the sound fills the room, kind of like in your car. So he is like making these, not prank calls, but these kind of harassing type calls to the, basically the secretaries to the secretary general. So like, and being like demanding to speak to them and saying, making accusations about this man from Mars that they're hiding. And so his hovercraft cab thing that he's in locks down and takes him straight to the police station. And so they've got him. He's now a political prisoner. He's a political dissident and a political prisoner. And nobody knows where he is. And actually some fake calls were made to his office to say that he was away on business. So they're stuffing this guy too. And there was something about that too that I was thinking of, because one of the, in this sort of dystopian sort of conspiratorial mind that I have, because I read all this stuff with, as far as our future here on Earth, how we've got these electric cars, we got these Teslas and stuff, and they want to they don't want gas powered vehicles, and they eventually want everybody driving electric cars. I was thinking about that, like, when it comes to like central bank digital currencies and how they can control where you go and how you spend your money, whether, how much your money's worth, whether you get to spend it, that like eventually if you've got like one of these electric cars, that if the cops want you, what's going to stop them from having some kind of a control system that's going to lock your car down and stop you? Like, you can't drive, like, you can't basically, you can't send the cops on a chase, in other words. Like, they'll have your car and they'll enter your information and they'll lock your car down, and they don't need to pull you over. Your car will stop, will pull over to the side of the road on its own, or your car will lock down and send you to the police station. And I've thought this before, and this is 1961, it's already in this book. So like, they're talking about how your vehicle will be controlled. And so that's where we're at with that. So the guy he's trying to sort of harass is the Secretary General, who is basically the president of this World Federation. Well, this guy, they kind of have this little chapter where he's talking to his wife. Hold on a second. I got workers in my backyard. Okay, so they got this chapter where this dude's, at home with his wife, and he's trying to eat dinner, and she's sort of, pecking at him about like what's going on with the man from Mars and all this stuff. And I guess I should back up a little bit, because Jillian Boardman, the strumpet, she while working in the hospital notices that that Mike is not in the room that he was left in before when she first encountered him. That he's not in that room anymore. That room is being guarded by a couple of Marines, or it was for a little while she was trying to plant the recording device. But then she went back to it because she was kind of looking for this electronic bed, and she goes into the room that she saw him in. And it has sort of like an anteroom with like a video screen with the patient in the next room on the other side of it, watching the patient, but it's not the man from Mars. They've moved him. And now there's this old lady in there. And so she's like, where's Smith, And the guy's like, what are you talking about? She's like, where's the man from Mars? He's like, oh, you're telling me he's here somewhere? No, there's just this old lady in here. I like, wow, I didn't know that man from Mars was in this hospital. And so they moved him. So she, the guy like goes to take a piss or something, and she like kind of like goes into the room, and so I don't know if the video screen is just kind of a fake, but she goes into the room beyond, and Smith is in the next room, and it's just that nobody knows it. And or maybe it's the next room. I don't know how exactly it went, I forgot, but I think it was this dude was watching a video screen of this supposed patient who's in this next room, who he thought was an old lady. Jillian goes into the room while the guy's taking a piss and finds Michael Smith in the room. And so he's happy to see her because they had shared a glass of water. And so now they're water brothers, because he calls her brother because he doesn't know what a woman is. And so shared a glass of water, which creates this deep spiritual bond between them, in his mind. And so she's like, okay, well, we had a glass of water, didn't know it was that big of a commitment. But for him, it was this major big deal because they don't have a lot of water on Mars. So if you drink water with somebody, that's a very deep and abiding bond that you have with that person. And so they had shared a glass of water on her first meeting with him. And so he's like, my water brother is here. And so he's happy to see her, and he's like, don't leave. And she's like, no, really, I gotta go. It's good to know you're here, but I gotta bail, I can't really be seen in here. And plus, she knew the guy was gonna be back from his piss within, a couple of minutes. So, so she confirms that he's there, and later decides to sort of break him out. And I don't think it happened on this particular day. I think she maybe got back with Ben and they talked about it, and she decided they decided that they were gonna do what they can to get this guy out and save him from the government, who was trying to not only exploit him but kind of disappear him at the same time. And so she manages to kind of break this guy out, and what she does is she kind of stuffs him in this bag, and no, she hasn't stuffed him in the bag yet. No, that happens later after she goes to Ben's apartment. No, what happens, I think she dresses him up in something, and sort of, she gets him out somehow. She gets him out onto the roof, and they take one of those air cabs, and she calls Ben, and she's like, look, I've got him. I'm with him. And he goes, okay, well, go to my apartment. No, wait, no. Did that happen? See, now I'm forgetting. I don't remember exactly how it went, because I think that he at one point had told her that she could go there anytime, and because he's missing already by now, and so yeah, I think that's the situation at this point, is that Ben's already missing, but she knows she has access to his apartment, so she takes Valentine Michael Smith. She's in this cab. She snuck him out of the hospital. And she takes him to Ben's apartment. And they go into Ben's apartment. And she gives Valentine Michael Smith a bath. And at that point, the feds show up. And they know that they already suspect her. So they're banging on the door. They're like, Jillian Boardman, it's the police. Open up, in the name of the law, open the door. She's like, oh, I'm not Jillian Boardman. I'm really, the cleaning lady. And so she's able to kind of stave them off for a minute while Valentine Michael Smith is getting dressed. But they kick down the door. They barge in. They catch them there. And they think that she's, like, screwing the guy because he's naked, because he just got out of the shower. And he's like, oh, well, this looks like some hanky-panky going on. So this dude who comes in, one of the feds, actually works directly underneath, or works directly for, the Secretary General of the Federation, and his name is Berquist, and so they're gonna arrest her, and this Valentine Michael Smith dude uses like his psychic powers and makes the two feds disappear, and so she sees these guys just like evaporate into thin air and is like, holy fuck, like, did that guy just do that with his mind? And so this was, this is something new. So this guy can make people disappear, apparently. And so he makes these two feds disappear because they were going to arrest her. They were going to put hands on her. And Valentine Michael Smith, he's not thinking about like whether she's going to go to jail. He thinks these guys are trying to hurt her. So he uses his psychic powers and makes these guys disappear. And so she kind of freaks out a little bit. She screams when the guy disappears. She's like, holy fuck, and like this sort of triggers Valentine Michael Smith to sort of withdraw into himself, because he, it probably was somewhat physically taxing on him to do this power thing. But not only that, he saw that she was like panicking. And so it caused him to withdraw, and he like curled up into the fetal position with like, and so she stuffs him in this like suitcase, basically, this big like golf bag, and zips it up, and she's got the man from Mars inside the suitcase, and she drags him out and takes him up to, every building I guess has a roof with taxi cabs that come down, and so she takes him up there, and this cab comes down, and or maybe she goes in a car with him or something, but she takes him to the one person who she knows to go to, who Ben had told her to go to, which is this guy named what is his name? What's the guy's name? Jubal, like, what is it? Jubal Hawthorne or something? No, I can't find the guy's name. Harsha. Jubal Harsha is the guy's name. So this guy's kind of like this sort of he's a writer, and he has this really nice estate. He's really rich, and so what he does, he's got these three beautiful secretaries that kind of hang around his house, and he just dictates his writings to these women. He just he'll be like swimming at the pool, and he'll like call them to attention, and they'll show up like with their stenographs ready to go. And hold on, let me pause this real quick. Okay, sorry. So he'll call them to attention, and they show up with their equipment ready to dictate. He's dictating to them, what to write. And I don't know if he's writing these like kind of like telenovela kind of things, or like these like Hallmark kind of clips, or what, like these sort of announcements or messages, or if they're episodes. But he's writing, I think, these stories. I think it's basically like soap operas. That's the way it seems. And so he's got these women, and his life is, I mean, he's like this older dude, like in his 50s, and he's like this almost kind of retired college professor type dude, kind of like, he's kind of a communist, or he's definitely got like progressive like sensibility. So it's kind of weird because, like I said, this book's written in like 1961, but his whole political mindset is very much like the woke elite of today. Like, so I mean, it's like the whole Frankfurt School mentality, and the kind of what's that? What's the guy's name? I can't remember the guy's name. I'm not gonna try to say it because I can't remember it. Saul Alinsky. That's who I was saying. He's kind of like a Saul Alinsky type of dude, and so yeah, he's like a full-on communist. And it's weird. Like, he teaches this sort of moral relativism. He's like this postmodernist type, and there's this part where he's talking to Jill, and he's like debating Jill, and he basically says that gratitude is a vice. Like, everything's like totally like morally opposite and upside down with this guy. So yeah, he's a wokey, and so basically she brings Valentine Michael Smith to his estate, and it's sort of in a remote area, and he's, in a way, he's kind of like, what, this Ben Caxton told you to bring him here? Like, what are you talking about? Well, we'll take him in, And so he, just in the interest of science, he allows the man from Mars to sort of live at his house with him. Like, his house is almost like a commune. And so he's got these kind of hanger-ons. He's got like 6 different people living with him, and they all kind of work for him in some capacity. And so he's sort of teaching Valentine Michael Smith at this point. He teaches him how to read. He gives him access to the pool, because one of the things that Valentine Michael Smith is able to do is like go in the pool, and he slows his heart rate down. He can slow his heart rate down consciously, and so he'll go in the water and just like lay down in the water for like an hour. And so that, like, this is the cover of the book, and that's like him laying down inside the water. That's what he does. And so he's kind of like a deeply spiritual guy, but he can barely speak any English. He's in a lot of ways, he's just kind of like a big baby, and he's also physically trying to acclimate to the Earth, because he was on Mars for a long time, and so he's trying to get his strength back. But what you're kind of starting to get from this story is that this dude has incredible powers, and once he's healed up and is on par, he's gonna be like the superhuman dude. And like I think he becomes like this kind of cult leader, which was in a way sort of part of the reason why I started reading this book, because when I was reading Chaos, the book about Charles Manson and the CIA by Tom O'Neill, he was talking about how this book was this huge influence on Charles Manson. When he got out of prison in 1967, his parole officer gave him this book, and he was like, well, see, the thing is that Manson was he was tested on as part of like MK Ultra while he was in prison. They were doing all these like psychological tests on prisoners, and a lot of how it's explained that Manson ended up being like this cult leader was for one, he was kind of trained by the CIA while he was going through a lot of this testing, probably in addition to his already sort of criminal sort of mindset. I mean, the guy was like a career criminal his whole life, ever since childhood, and already was sort of an outlaw by nature, was just a sort of nihilistic dude. But like when he was in prison, he was tested on, and in this MK Ultra program, and he probably picked up a lot of tricks from these psychologists who were working on him. So people like Gregory Bateson, were going. I mean, I don't know about him specifically, but that these guys were going into the prison and doing like LSD, giving him LSD and doing this like LSD therapy with him, and kind of maybe trying to brainwash him or see what his what his mental and cognitive limits were. But that Manson had learned a lot of these psychological tricks from the work that had been done on him. So when he got out, his parole officer was connected with MK Ultra and gave him this book, this Stranger in a Strange Land book that he was really influenced by. And I imagine that he identified with this Valentine Michael Smith dude, who I'm assuming is going to turn out to be like this kind of cult leader type of guy in this story, because already there's this kind of culty atmosphere where he's at this this Jubal Harshaw guy's house, and already it's kind of setting the stage for this. There's already like some followers kind of hanging out there, and so I'm thinking that he becomes sort of like the leader of these people. And so I mean, I'm kind of at the part in the book where this Jubal Harshaw guy has, like, Jill has told him everything that's happened up till now, and she tells him about how he made those feds disappear. And so what he wants to do is set up cameras and have this professional witness there and everything, and sort of set it up for him to do the same thing again, so he can determine whether or not it was real. And that's another thing that made me think of MK Ultra, was that he thought that maybe Jillian had been duped into thinking that those guys had disappeared. Like maybe she was under hypnosis when Valentine Michael Smith made those guys disappear out of thin air, and he wanted to test to make sure it was actually real and that it wasn't just suggestion or tricks of some sort. And so he set up these. He's basically got these video apparatus set up. He's got like a witness there, and he wants to like make it really official that this guy actually has this power. And he hasn't, where I'm at the book, he's probably about 2 pages away from testing it out. So that's where I'm at in the book. One of the things I missed, one of the details I missed, was I was talking about the Secretary General for the World Federation, that he was sort of this henpecked kind of old man that, there was a struggle for power going on in the World Federation, and there was a possibility that somebody other than an American was going to become, there's this basic jockeying for power going on, and that his power was sort of on this tightrope. But the whole thing is that this guy's wife actually runs the World Federation from behind him. It's like a Hillary Clinton type thing, where like, this guy, he's the figurehead, and he's the main dude, but he doesn't really run anything. It's like Joe Biden, it's like he's basically kind of a puppet, and he doesn't have a very strong personality, but he has this really domineering wife who makes all his decisions, and she's actually the one. Like, she'll like call up his secretary and be like, "Get down here! I've got some things I need to tell you," and she orders everybody around. But the ironic thing with her is that she actually takes her influence from this astrologer. She's all into astrology. She's like this Shirley MacLaine type, like she's all like she'll call up her astrologer and be like, "Give me a reading on the man from Mars," and like this astrologer doesn't even really know what she's doing. She's like this young, kind of like amateurish astrologer, who did have somebody who was teaching her who had died, so like she was sort of apprenticing as an astrologer under this dude who was really good at it, but this woman doesn't really have her thing. She's like, "I can't even remember how to do the maths," but she does work for the first lady basically. And so the first lady is running the World Federation under the guidance of an amateur kind of apprentice astrologer. And so it's like, where are we in the world? Do we really have this astrologer who's, it's almost like what you could imagine is going on today. Like in, our world, in America and the rest of the world, there's this like global superpower that's being run by like, the whims of some like pink-haired like 12-year-old girl, or like, it's like, where are these orders coming from? Like, there's obviously somebody like really, goofy behind the whole thing. It's not somebody really smart who's coming up with all. Maybe there's a method to the madness, but it pretty much seems like we do have sort of a crazy person at the wheel. And so that's what's going on with this sort of henpecked secretary general guy whose wife gives him the business, and he's just like totally powerless when he's at dinner and she's just like haranguing him, and he's just like, "Oh, I hope she doesn't, she doesn't hurt me." He's like scared of his own wife, and he doesn't sleep with her. It's like they just sort of made this domestic arrangement that just kind of went afoul, and now she's running the world. So anyway, so that's pretty much where I'm at with this book, Stranger in a Strange Land by Michael Heinlein. All right, well, there it is. 4 books. This one was pretty long, so if you made it this far, then right on, right arm. You win the golden nugget. Like and subscribe, share this video, and redeem your golden nugget on our next episode. I already have my notes written out for the next one. I'm gonna do The Great Gatsby, Practice and Theory of Bolshevism by Bertrand Russell, installment number 3 of Capitalism and Freedom by Milton Friedman, and Brave New World, chapter 1. So that's going to be the next episode. Hopefully I'll have that out for you soon. I already have my notes written out. I just got to kind of type them, and this one was a little more off the cuff. The next one I'm just going to read straight off the notes. So we'll get a little bit of this and a little bit of that. But anyway, have a good one. Bye.